All right, today we are diving into a pretty incredible true story. This isn't from a movie script, it's pulled straight from a Thai Supreme Court ruling. And this case really has it all. We're talking a high-tech crime, a full-on digital manhunt, and a courtroom battle that's just full of twists. So let's get right into it.
Just think about this for a second. What actually happens when a hospital's entire medical system, everything is shut down from the outside? You've got surgeries on the schedule, doctors trying to pull up patient records, nurses managing appointments, and then, boom, suddenly it all just stops. The digital heart of the entire hospital flatlines. It's a nightmare scenario, right?
Well, this wasn't some hypothetical question. This is exactly what went down at Surin Hospital. 1 minute, it's a totally normal, functioning medical center. And the next, its most critical systems just go completely dark. And when I say critical systems, I mean the core operational software. It's called the SSB system, and it controlled pretty much everything. Surgeries, anesthesia, patient appointments, you name it. We're not just talking about the email server going down here. This was the system that ran the whole show. The entire hospital was thrown into absolute chaos, literally unable to do its most basic, life-saving jobs. Okay, so check out the timeline. At 1 a.m. on December 10th, bam, the system goes down. The IT team, you can imagine, is scrambling, and they manage to get it back up and running. But then, and this is the kicker, 2 days later, at 11 in the morning, it happens all over again. It became crystal clear very fast that this was no random glitch. This wasn't some piece of old equipment failing. This was a deliberate, targeted attack. So now the hospital is basically under siege, and a full-scale investigation kicks off. But they weren't looking for a physical intruder, right? They were hunting for a ghost in the machine. This was a digital manhunt, plain and simple, to find out who was pulling the strings. And right away, the investigators knew one absolutely critical thing. See, to shut down the core network switches like this, an attacker can't just, brute force their way in from the outside. No way. They had to have the keys to the kingdom, the administrator username and password. And what does that tell you? It means the attacker was almost certainly an insider, or at the very least, someone with privileged access. So the next logical question is, who had those keys? Well, the list turned out to be incredibly short. We're talking just 6 people. And right there on that list, among the hospital's own IT staff and a couple of vendors, was the one person who had designed and installed the entire system back in 2013, the man who would soon become the prime suspect. So the investigators, they just followed the classic digital forensics playbook. First things first, they dove straight into the system logs. Now, you can think of these logs as kind of like the black box recorder for a computer network. They record everything. They were looking for the attacker's digital fingerprints, and in this case, that meant finding the IP addresses used during the attacks. And this was the huge breakthrough. The logs showed that both attacks came from 2 specific IP addresses. So the investigators traced them, and they didn't lead to some random hacker cafe in another country. No, they led directly to an internet account. An account registered to the company of, you guessed it, the original system installer. Bingo. Okay, so they've got their guy, right? The case moves to the courtroom. But as you probably know, having a suspect and actually getting a conviction, well, those are 2 very different things. And this legal battle was about to take some pretty dramatic turns. And this is where the story gets really wild. So in the first trial, get this, the defendant was acquitted. He walked free. But the prosecutor wasn't having it. They appealed, and the Court of Appeals came back and completely reversed the decision, found him guilty, sentenced him to 6 years in prison. So you have to ask, what on earth changed? Why would 2 different courts look at the exact same evidence and come to completely opposite conclusions? Well, one of the defendant's main arguments was basically a legal technicality. He claimed the whole case was illegitimate. But the court shot that down, and it's because of this really important legal concept in Thailand. See, hacking a public hospital isn't just a crime against that one hospital. It's considered a public interest crime, an offense against the entire public. And what that means is the prosecutor has the power to press charges, period. Now, it's probably no surprise that the defendant appealed his guilty verdict. So the case went all the way to the top, to Thailand's Supreme Court. They would have the final say, and their decision was going to set a huge precedent for cybercrime cases in the whole country. In the Supreme Court, well, they just systematically dismantled the entire defense. They went right down the list. They ruled that yes, the IP address evidence was solid and credible. They confirmed the hospital's own system logs were totally valid evidence.
They completely rejected the defense's argument that it was just some equipment failure. And, super importantly, they agreed that the two attacks were two separate crimes. Every single appeal was dismissed. And here's the real nail in the coffin for that whole equipment failure defense. The court pointed out this one simple but incredibly powerful fact. The hospital showed that as soon as they changed all the admin passwords, guess what happened? The problems stopped. Completely, instantly. It wasn't faulty hardware. It was an unauthorized person who just got locked out. So, the defendant also tried another angle. He argued, okay, fine. If I was guilty, it should all be treated as one single crime. But the court said, nope. They ruled the two attacks were what's called tangkam tangwara, which basically means they were separate acts, each with its own intent. Now, this distinction might sound small, but it was absolutely vital, because it meant he could be sentenced for each crime separately, effectively doubling the potential jail time. And so, the final verdict came down. The Supreme Court upheld the conviction. That original 6-year sentence from the appeals court was reduced slightly, down to 4 years. The reason was, even though the defendant denied everything, his testimony was still seen as being useful to the court. And just like that, the long legal battle was finally over.
All right, so why are we talking about this one specific case from a hospital in Thailand? What's the big deal? Well, because the story really doesn't just end with the verdict. This case is a huge lesson about the world we all live in today.
So here's why this really matters to all of us. For one, it set a major legal precedent in Thailand. It proved that digital evidence, stuff like IP logs, can be enough to secure a conviction. 2, it's a massive wake-up call about just how vulnerable our critical public systems really are. And 3rd, it shows that even when you don't have a physical smoking gun, a digital trail can be just as powerful, just as damning. And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty unsettling question. I mean, sure, the Surin Hospital hack was an inside job, but it points to a much bigger truth about how much we all rely on these incredibly complex digital systems. It really forces you to stop and ask, just how secure are the essential services that we all depend on every single day? From hospitals to the power grid, how safe are they really?